All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We're your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I am your host. Start with the usual, I suppose. Thank you all very much for listening. It means a lot to me that there's anyone out there that listens to my ramblings, so thank you very much. Any way you can interact with the product is always appreciated. Like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review. You all know the drill about that. What do we got on the agenda this evening? Last night, UFC 307, and man, what a disappointment. I did not have high hopes for that card, but yeesh. We'll get to it. We got a preview coming up. UFC is back in the warehouse, so we'll preview that card, and then a little bit of news. Not a lot. A lot of pointless drama that I don't care enough to talk about. So we'll leave that alone because that's not what I do here. So yeah, that's kind of what we got. Yeah, all for the preamble. So once again, thanks everybody, and let's jump into this, shall we? Last night, UFC 307 came to the world from the Delta Center here in Salt Lake City. I don't live in Salt Lake, but I do live in Utah. And I've got to start with. Let me start with a few things about the event before I get to the fights in particular. So, first of all, long event. Some of which was foreseeable, some of which maybe not as much. Um, lot of decisions. Um, let's see, we had how many fights did we have? 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, we only had 12 fights. But we had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We had 7 decisions out of 12 fights, which is always going to rack up the broadcast time. And our main event went into the 4th round. I'm not complaining about the main event. I'm just noting, like, we were here for a bit. And some of it was fine. Some of it was. Full disclosure, I'm going to be spending the lion's share of this review talking about the main event and then a handful of notes I have um, about something that kind of really struck me last night. Um, I talked about it before, but I'll save that for the end. Not the end. I'll save that for when I talk about Bautista and Aldo, which is going to deserve its own little section. But the big thing last night, and I mean like the big thing everyone's talking about, two things really. One is a bit of an oddity. There was a very, very bad officiating job in the fight between Cesar Almeida and Ihor Potieria. Um, some very quick breaks in the clinch, which I'm actually more sympathetic to when you look at that. But the ref in question missed like several fouls. I think the second round in particular featured 3 eye pokes and a punch to the groin, and nothing was done about it. That's a problem. I actually didn't care about his breaking the clinch because nothing was happening. Um, but terrible job by that ref. Just very bad. The judging pretty much all night was weird. Weird to bad. Um, we had what, 4 split decisions? Um, two, some of which I don't object to them being split. A couple of them were just close enough to merit it. But like the co-main event was split, and nobody agrees. Didn't they have Mike Bell back for this one? I think he was the one who was back. And hang on, let me look at old Mr. Bell here. Because I yelled about this gentleman. I think it was last year. Yeah, I had to yell about this guy last year. when he scored the fifth round of Grasso and Shevchenko at 10-8, resulting in the split draw. I yelled about that. You want to go listen to my review from last year of that UFC Noche card, then by all means. Um, but he has turned in some weird scorecards. And then this last night he was on 3 of these and turned in some terrible work. I mean, he was on 306 too. Fortunately, none of those fights were all that controversial. But he's going to be back in some circles of discussion here for this one because if we're talking about UFC 307, he was involved in the Pennington and Pena fight. And by the way, was the only judge to give Pena the first round of that fight. Sorry, no, wait. Cleary gave Pennington the first round. That's weird. Because two of the judges, yeah, Bell and D'Amato going weird on that first round. Because I did not think Pena deserved to win that first round or that fight, but so he was involved in that one. By the way, minor note, nobody in the media scored that fight from Juliana Pena. Not a one of them. He was involved in the Bautista and Aldo fight, which I will yell about when I get to it. And I can't be too mad about Lucindo and Rodriguez. That kind of just deserves to be close enough. But it's just... I don't know with this guy. I really don't. I mean, it's not like everybody had a great... This is one of the other things. Like, yeah, the judging was bad, but the judges last night were all the usual people. We had semi-sentient can of tomato soup Sal D'Amato. We had Chris Bellend. Lee, who's a fixture of these things. It's just was not a good night for the judging. And that's kind of what people are talking about coming out of this, because there was a little bit of controversy from where I sat about the scoring of the main event, because all 3 judges had Rountree up 29-28 going into the 4th. And I don't think I agree with that about the first round, but I'll have to rewatch that. We'll get to that fight in a second or two, I promise. But there's also seemed just a very weird application of some of the standards. Aldo and Bautista in particular, just that third round, man. That was a... Ugh. There were a few different factors that coalesced into how that played out the way it did, I think. And we'll get to that again kind of when we get to it. So, judging, not great. Finishes at kind of a premium. Not completely bereft of them, but we only had 2 finishes on the main card. One of those was an injury corner stoppage. We only had 1 finish on the normal prelims, a good one from Joaquin Buckley. And we had 2 on the very early prelims, but nobody cares about the very early prelims, so meh. Yeah, it was a rough night. If not for the main event, and we'll get to that. Last thing I want to do before I get to that, the prediction tracker. How did we do? 7 and 5. Which of these annoyed me? A couple of them were just decisions that maybe could have gone the way that I picked, like the co-main and Aldo and Bautista. The Dolidze and Holland one, I vacillated on that one. I stuck with Holland, but injuries. I can't get mad at that. I don't know how that fight would have played out over another couple of rounds. Dolidze certainly had a good first round. Um, Lucindo over Rodriguez. I kind of scored that for Rodriguez, but you could go the other. I'm not mad at 20. I'm not actually mad about that one going either direction. You could have scored it for Rodriguez. I maybe should have gone with the younger fighter, just given the age disparity there. Um, Hernandez over Hubbard. I maybe should have got that one right. Hubbard's not a bad fighter, but this fight put something into very stark relief for me about him that I'll talk about when I get to. Um, yeah, so that's kind of where that was. Couple of split decisions that maybe should have gone my way, but what are you gonna do? And it's not like I only got favorites that won. I did pick a couple of underdogs. McGee was, I think, the big underdog that I picked that kind of cashed. The others were favorites, weren't they? Holland was the favorite. I should have rethought that. Oh well. Water under the bridge, as the old saying goes. So year to date, 279 and 19 with 4 no contests. So still doing okay. I'd rather be further than as close as I was to being 50-50 on this card, but still not in the negative. So thumbs up on that. I'm okay with it. All right. So let's talk about the main event where a lot of the time here is going to be devoted. Main event, Alex Pereira defeats Khalil Rountree Jr. via TKO punches, knees, just kind of a nice finishing flurry, mostly punches for the final stretch at 4:32 of the 4th round. This was your fight of the night. Hands down, your fight of the night. I don't even think there was a close second. What would have been second, hypothetically? Not Pennington. There was there was a bit of a dramatic thing in the 4th round there. That fight was not very good. Batista and Aldo the first 2 rounds of Batista and Aldo were actually pretty solid stuff. 3rd round was where that one kind of fell apart. Not Harrison and Vieira, not Buckley and Thompson. Okay, Buckley and Thompson would have been third. Would have been the runner-up for fight of the night. Paled in comparison to Pereira and Rountree, but as I look back through that, Buckley and Thompson had a pretty good fight. So, but the fact that I had to, take a minute and go over that again to remind me, there was another fight that could have got the fight of the night bonus. Yeah, Pereira and Rountree. This is one of the fights of the year. I don't know where it's going to wind up on fight of the year, but what a tremendous bout this was. I gave the first. Here's where I diverged from a few people. I gave the first round to Pereira. Rountree came out, fought very, very well. I didn't think he landed as cleanly as a lot of people did. That's why I gave Pereira the first. I thought Pereira did the more substantive work, not just in terms of numbers, which he did have an advantage on in all 3, 4 rounds, but the second round in particular was where Rountree actually started getting his game to work. The first round, he did a lot of stuff defensively very well. He was very prepared to deal with the hook, the left hook. Being opposite stance doesn't negate that, but it clearly, because that it's Jamal Hill fights southpaw and he got just slept. Doesn't remove it, but it changes it a little bit. It messes with the calf kicks. It actually took Pereira until more the 3rd round to get because doing the outside calf kick and open stance, it's not quite as powerful because it's the lead leg, obviously. It also takes a little bit to get it to work as consistently. Third round, he started getting it there and kind of messed up Khalil's lead leg, but took a bit. Normally, he's very active with those. He was not as active with them here. The lead hand, again, the left hook was not necessarily as there. The high kick from Pereira, he threw it a fair bit, but Rountree was very ready to deal with that, and the body kick, actually. A few different times he either caught that or scooped it and countered. In fact, he technically dropped Pereira, I think, with a right hand, avoided a head kick in the second, and then Pereira threw it so hard he kind of spun, and Rountree just cracked him with a right hand from the back, basically. A really nice sequence. But first round, you can see Rountree's game plan in the first round. He is going to use his speed, which took Pereira a minute or two to adjust to. I shouldn't say a minute or two. It took him a while to get a handle on that. And even then, part of what made it work was Rountree slowing. He was going to have to close distance because he was at a height and sort of a reach disadvantage, a range disadvantage in general. It's not always about reach. It's about fighting range, and his range is closer than Pereira's. So he was able to do some of that, but not quite as consistently. Not able to land as consistently in the first. He swung real hard, but he didn't land really all that cleanly in the first round. And I think the big motion and the fact that he was kind of getting to the shoulders or into the chest on occasion with his punches may have made people think he was landing better than he was. I have to rewatch this to decide if I'm going to stand on that, but that's where I was in real time. And I just thought Pereira did slightly better work overall. He landed a couple of pretty decent body kicks. But I'm not. The big thing for me was there was a point about midway through the round. He avoided a punch from Rountree and then cracked him with a counter right that snapped Khalil's head back, like really got his attention. But I'm not dying on that hill. That's just that's what I think of it at the moment. And on reevaluation, I might feel differently. Second round, very clearly Khalil's. That's where everything really starts working for him. Um, the distance closing, some of the more powerful punches start to get through. He's able to counter a bit more. The first round is a lot of him neutralizing Pereira's weaponry. We don't have to worry about the calf kick already, so he might throw the outside one a little bit, but he's going to prefer to throw the right leg. So be ready for the body kick, be ready for the high kick, and he absolutely was. Cover the lead hand. Pereira's left hook, while it is dynamite, is a very close range weapon because he throws it properly. If you see a lot of other guys in MMA in particular, oh, the left hand's really good. You watch them throw it, like they can get power, but it's big and it's looping and it's long. Kind of more of a casting punch than a really tight hook. Pereira throws that thing real tight. It's kind of what generates the power. It's insane. But because it's a close quarters weapon, little bit of coverage, little bit of distance understanding, and you don't have to worry about that as much. I shouldn't say especially closed stance because you defend it differently, open versus closed. But open stance, being able to just kind of cover his lead hand, being engaged in the hand fight in that area, mitigates that a lot. Especially if you're proactive rather than reactive with it. One of the things that gets people in trouble with Pereira's lead hand, that's got Hill in trouble if you want an open stance iteration of understanding this. Hill was reacting to Pereira's lead hand instead of proactively hand fighting it and trying to cover, block, obscure. And being a bit more reactive to it, you're stuck trying to guess. And guessing on Pereira is a bad time. He is fast, he is powerful, and the consequences for being wrong are dire. So Rountree being more proactive with that negated a lot of that. Pereira does a lot of body jabbing normally. Did not have almost any of that. I don't know if that was a stance. it's not that you can't jab the body open stance. You absolutely can. In fact, if you're orthodox in their southpaw, putting the liver that much closer makes it a very inviting target. I think he was partially concerned about some of the counters, and the other thing is you gotta, especially on a guy as because Khalil Rountree's not a small man, but he's more compact than Pereira, so he'd have to shift levels a little bit to try and get down there. I just don't think that was a thing he really wanted to engage in, given some of the physical dimensions of Rountree, to say nothing of, again, the power coming back at him, which had to be respected. But Rountree was very ready through those first, I'd almost say like 12-ish minutes for Pereira. Uh, was very ready defensively. Look at the way he's moving. He's never going the direction that Pereira really wants him to go until things really fall apart later in the fight. Um, but by that point, I mean, even then, he's actually still, if you look at the way he's circling, it's correctly. He's still moving a little bit away from the power, but he's effectively behind a shoulder and an elbow and moving his head when he circles to his right to be cognizant of the left hook. Um, yeah, just very ready for the body kicks, very ready for the front kicks. Pereira has some very good front kicks. He got him working later, but the first few he threw one to start the fight, and Rountree caught it. Like, really nice catch of a front kick. So very, very well prepared. And this is where you have to give a boatload of credit to Rountree and his team. I mean, I said on this podcast last week, you know, guys who are willing to engage these devastating strikers are a lot of times the ones that give them problems because a lot of the guys they fight are just not willing to. And that's a very bad way to go about this. Rountree was willing. And he absorbed a metric ton of punishment when it started rolling downhill, but he was ready. He was absolutely ready. Officially being up 2-1 after 3, unanimously across the 3 judges, whether or not I agree or not. Very, very difficult fight. Pereira, you could see it after the second, because that was Rountree's best round. Pereira had to really rebuild the fight. And Pereira, what's impressive about this is he didn't do anything crazy. He didn't uncork a wheel kick. Anything wild like that. What he normally would like to do wasn't working. So he went back to what are the fundamentals? Okay, you can use your jab, open stance. Let's start jabbing. You've got the calf kick. It's got to be a little bit different, but you've still got it. And he just started getting back to, then he started getting once the lead leg of Rountree was a little bit compromised and the jab had started landing, then the front kick opens up. And that starts to work. Then, throw the head kick a little bit more, and it's still blocked, but now the counters are a little bit slower. And the third round is Pereira taking his game, stripping it down to the fundamentals, and then rebuilding how he's got to fight Khalil Rountree. Because what he did for the first couple of rounds, I gave him the first, but clearly not everyone agrees with me. And then the second definitively did not go Pereira's way. I mean, he got cracked with that right hand I mentioned. Also, at the end of that second round, Rountree lands a head kick that, under slightly different circumstances, might have ended things. Pereira realizes it's coming in at the last second, so instead of completely ducking into it, he's able to shift his momentum back the other way just a bit, kind of gets a glove up. He still gets kicked in the head. But if he'd committed to the head movement that he started with instead of being able to make that split-second reactive motion, he might have just gone to sleep. That's the power that Rountree has and the way he threw that kick. So Pereira had to completely, okay, let's strip everything back and let's get back to work. And it's the jab, once it got going, was a real problem. Rountree in the third round slowed a bit. He was still trying, and I don't mean to imply otherwise, but some of the dynamism was a little bit gone. And by the third, he's just a hair slower, and Pereira has now seen enough of what he's doing to have a better defensive read on it. And he starts getting that jab, man. It messed up Rountree's right eye. It started messing him up, and then by the fourth round, it was a total disaster. Um, if he hadn't got the stoppage in the fourth, they would have stopped that between 4 and 5. That was the kind of cut that stops a fight, or should stop a fight at least. But once the jab has messed up that right eye, then he can't quite read the motion for the calf kick as well. The calf kick starts landing. Then he starts throwing back, and Pereira starts pulling and countering instead of pulling and completely retreating. And it starts going bad. Not hugely. The third round, definitely Pereira's round, but Rountree is not out of that fight just yet. The fourth round is the culmination of what Pereira builds in the third. It's all head movement, and he's no longer retreating from the attacks of Rountree. He's blocking, slipping, countering. And the jab is still pounding in there. The body work's still fairly effective, if somewhat more intermittent. And the jab is really the story of the fight. The jab, bring the guard high, get a slight angle, had a cup, and crack the right hand in. He just starts battering Rountree. They could have stopped this a little bit earlier than they did. He starts hitting knees in the clinch. He's not reaching for the clinch, which he kind of tries to do a little bit earlier, and Rountree just nope. Very, very well aware of what was going to happen there. It's the fourth round. Once Rountree slows and Pereira feels more comfortable in the pocket, that in combination or as it's ending, he'll start grabbing and throwing a knee. Beautiful finishing sequence, cracks him with the right hand up against the fence. Rountree just guard up, all heart. And when you got someone who just won't go down from headshots, Pereira does the right thing. Right hook, it goes to the liver. Normally that's the left, but Rountree's still slightly in his stance, even though he's against the fence, so you can angle that right hook so it goes across the body, hits the liver, right to the liver, left to the liver, right uppercut. Rountree drops. The uppercut, while it landed, wasn't what dropped him. It was. You can look at how Rountree goes down. That's how you go down after a hard body shot. Just finally had to shut him down because Rountree absorbed an insane amount of punishment and would not go away. Um, Wonderful fight, wonderful performance by Khalil Rountree, who, once again, listen to last week, I had no problem picking Pereira. None whatsoever. But this was the kind of fight that historically, for the kind of fighter Pereira is, people sleep on or people assume things and it goes not the way you expected. I've One of the other times I brought this up, this is several years back now, but Joanna Jędrzejczyk made kind of a name for herself. This is during her title reign, just bludgeoning some of these poor women. Like she just battered Carla Esparza, then she turned Jessica Pene's face into a pro wrestling Crimson Mask in their fight. Then she fought Valerie Letourneau. I think that's it. I can picture her in my head. I just can't. There's a shockingly high number of women in MMA whose first name begins with a V and last name begins with an L, and it kind of gets scrambled up a little bit in my brain. So I think that I want to say it was Letourneau, who was primarily a striker. And I think I said in my preview, like, don't expect Joanna to just bulldoze her the same way she did Carla Esparza or Jessica Penne. Striker versus striker doesn't look like that when the other striker knows what they're doing. And Joanna still won that match fairly easily. But it wasn't, hey, I knocked you out in 3 rounds. Because it was never going to be that. But so same kind of thing here. And Rountree, Got a standing ovation from the crowd after this. Absolutely deserved it. Dana White posted a photo of his face. That cut on his eye is bad. During his post-fight interview, a bunch of blood came out of his nose. That my brother's like, "Oh, is that a booger?" Like, well, not saying there's no mucus involved in that, but a lot of that's coagulant. Especially because he came in with a little bit of a cut on the bridge of his nose. It was clearly healed, but had happened recently enough that like you can see that's what happened. That was the first thing that started bleeding on him. So if Pereira did break his nose or something, or even if it wasn't broken, if it was cut enough to be bleeding out, you stick the coagulant up into the nostrils and you get it deep in there, and you hope that it gets into the blood vessels. When you pull out, they no longer bleed out of their nose, and then you just really pray that you don't get punched in the nose again, because then it starts bleeding all over again. But what came out of there was, once again, mucus was definitely part of the equation. But there was coagulant in there. That's kind of why it didn't just fall out. Um, but he got battered, man. But he forced Pereira to completely restart the fight, basically in the third round. Um, a lot of what Pereira wanted to do in 1 and 2 just wasn't working. What he normally does wasn't really having the same effect as usual. And he had to, and this is, credit to Pereira, had to adjust, had to start over. Like, okay, let's break this back down. Let's start with the very basics, and this guy's going to start slowing down. That's one of the things he mentioned was he knows that Rountree was going to be a big problem the first couple of rounds, but he was going to slow over time, which is kind of true for Rountree in general and for a lot of guys with that style more specifically. Roundtree's done well in third rounds in the past. When I say it's true of him in general, like he slows a bit, but he doesn't like have this he doesn't necessarily have a dramatic fall off. But a lot of guys who do use that style, it's energy. There's a high demand on your energy for that style. We've seen it with, I mean, Buckley got the third round stoppage over Stephen Thompson, but you could see it with Buckley too. Like the burst he showed in the third round was really good, but prior to that, they hadn't been coming quite as easily. Um, so similar thing here. But once Pereira oh, you're a little bit slower. I know kind of what you're doing. I've got a feel for the distance. I got a feel for the timing, and I've hurt you. Your eyes messed up. Your nose is bleeding. You've been cracked. Your legs hurt. Watching Pereira actually go to work was really impressive because you can see this with him when he goes into finishing mode. It's one of the things that gets him in trouble on occasion. Did in kickboxing, did against Adesanya. When he goes to finish, his defense shifts. Normally, he's got a very rigid guard, and it's a little bit higher. It's not the full-on, like, hands in front of the face thing, but he's got a very strong frame with his hands. And they're in kind of the traditional guard, so he can move them a little bit, but a lot of what he does is be very resistant. And then a little bit too much leaning, but he's a big guy, so, And against a shorter guy in particular, if your feet are still mobile, it's not the end of the world. But when he goes to finish you, those hands drop more down towards his... They go from being up kind of by the shoulders and lower jaw to more under the shoulder. They're not always done at the hips, but they do drop, and some of that is intentional. He's not doing this as just a bad habit. He's trying to not let you see where the punches are coming from. Because a lot of your defense is like pattern based. It's reactive. It's I see so I know what I'm doing, and it's why some guys even will just fight with their hands down lower because it's harder to see, harder to react to. The problem is your defense suffers a lot. When the switch gets flipped for Pereira, his guard shifts dramatically. It visibly is not the same. because he feels better and it's a little bit stronger and it's a little bit harder to react to those punches coming from different angles than you're necessarily used to seeing. And it can be a very effective finishing tool, but like everything in fighting, there's positives and negatives. If he kept his hands all the way up in defensive position the whole time, he's not going to get as many finishes because it's just a little bit easier to defend. But he's probably not as vulnerable to counters once things get a little bit crazier. So it's just kind of give and take. You make your choices in that respect. Worked for him here. Rountree, I must give credit to Khalil Rountree. He was game through this whole thing. Even when he was getting battered, he was throwing back. Hats off to him, man. That was a great challenger performance in a losing effort. Was what that was. For Pereira, this is now 3 title defenses because he had the rematch with Yuri, then Hill, and yeah, this is his 3rd title defense of light heavyweight. And I've seen a lot of people saying this, so I'm gonna echo it. Alex Pereira I don't know if he's the fighter of the year for 2024. This is 3 title defenses this year. And technically, it's 4 title fights in the last 12 months, if you look at when he won the belt. 4 title fights in less than 12 months is an insane pace to keep. Did a few of those on short notice. I know he did one of them on short notice. Did one with, busted up feet. Dude just will fight. I don't know if he's fighter of the year for 2024. There's a couple of months left, and frankly, if Ilia Topuria does what he says he's going to do against Max Holloway, I know Pereira will have more wins, but if you beat Volkanovski and Max Holloway in the same year, especially stopping one, and especially if he does what he claims he's going to do and stops Max, I find that it's not impossible. But, the only time Max has been finished was his UFC debut when he got tapped out by Poirier when Max was much younger and just in over his head. He's lost since then, but he's never been finished. So if you stop those 2 guys in the same year, the quality of those 2 wins might eclipse what Pereira's done. But I do feel definitively whether or not Pereira is fighter of the year for 2024, he might be. That remains up in the air a little bit. He is undisputedly, I believe, the MVP for the UFC of 2024. Think for just a minute about what that guy has done in this year. He has fought, I said 3 times, starting in April. And again, when he beat Yuri to win the belt, that was November. So 4 title fights in 12 months. Because I do year to year, I'm not counting the Prochazka one. So this year, April, main event, UFC 300, knocks out Jamal Hill. Short notice, sort of a short notice thing against Yuri rematch. Stops him in the 2nd round with a beautiful head kick. For a UFC 303, which desperately needed it. And here, 307, weak card. Very weak card. Who do we call? Pereira. What's he deliver? One of the fights of the year. I mean, the other 2 times he delivered beautiful knockouts. This time, not only a beautiful stoppage, again, potentially fight of the year. Don't know where it'll end up, but it's going to be somewhere on that list, I think. Since his signing in 2021, he's only lost once at middleweight, and he has been in main events, not just title fights, but the main so his first fight, obviously not. Second fight goes the distance with Bruno Silva. Third fight was the fight with Strickland. 4th fight for the belt, wins it. 5th fight for defending the belt, loses it. Featured bout, not main event, when he fought Jan in his light heavyweight debut. After that, main event, main event, main event, main event. Not just title fights, which also, but the last guy. The main event is what you are putting, like, that's what's got to carry the weight. In 2024, that man has shouldered 3 pay-per-views. UFC 300 didn't really need him necessarily. It needed something, but it also had the prestige of being UFC 300, and you had Max and Gaethje there. Like, you had some other stuff there, but who was your last fight? Pereira. 303 desperately needed saving. That card needed saving. They couldn't find a main event for that one. Yeah, originally that was supposed to be, wasn't that supposed to be McGregor and Chandler? Yeah, and then McGregor pulls out. So on short notice, what do we do? Who saves the day? Poetan. UFC 307, kind of a throwaway pay-per-view with a less than stellar card on paper. We need something that'll get people to pay for it. And by the way, when those two made the walk, had to in the moment save a very poor card. Had to give everyone something to be excited about, because there was not a whole lot about the rest of this card. And both those guys delivered in that case, but I'm talking about Pereira. Without Pereira, the entire 2024 of the UFC looks radically different. Think about that for a second. 300 is probably going to be a success no matter what, but you probably would go with the main event of Gaethje and Holloway, and frankly, what a wonderful fun capstone that would have been, but 303, what does that become if Pereira's not there? That's a scary thing to think about. What is this if Pereira's not there? Gonna main event with that Pennington and Pena fight? I mean, in theory you could, but good grief. I mean, even if we just put aside the business side of things, for what he's done for pay-per-views, for just a second, imagine the light heavyweight division without him. That division is still not in a very good place. But at least it has Alex Pereira at the top. He is probably the only really interesting thing about that division, for being honest. And he has been Anderson Silva, somewhat famously. John Jones and Daniel Cormier were supposed to fight at UFC 200. Drug test issue for John. Fight didn't happen. So they shuffled a few things around. That's actually why Amanda Nunes and Miesha Tate were the main event. Because that was supposed to be John in DC. But they need someone on during fight week to come here and fight Daniel Cormier. And Anderson Silva winds up accepting, bless him. And he shows up in a Superman cape because he saved the day. Dude, Pereira has more or less saved the UFC's 2024. There's a lot of other things that have been going on. He's only had 3 fights, but he's had 3 title fights. The UFC values those. Take those off the board for just half a second. What does some of those cards look like? Not just that, but what's the ripple effect of how everything else shakes out? It's not great. That man has been saving their bacon this year. He's been the thing. So whether he's fighter of the year or not, at the moment he is. I got to see how Topuria and Holloway plays out. Because Max might wind up having a claim too, just to be perfectly honest. If he reclaims the featherweight title, that would be a heck of a thing. So that remains to be seen, but hands down, the most valuable fighter for the UFC this year has been Alex Pereira. Hands down. After the fight, he was asked, what do you want to do? He said, I thought about maybe trying middleweight again, but it looks like Sean Strickland's getting the next shot at Dricus, so I don't want to get involved in that because Sean's one of my training partners. Whatever the whatever the reasoning. Pereira doesn't make excuses, really. But whatever the reason happens to be, I don't care. I'm not very interested in Pereira at middleweight anymore. Um, Briefly speaking of the middleweight belt, DDP's head coach indicated it might be the Sydney, is it Sydney? An Australia card, and Strickland's reaction to that was kind of funny. But they might do that rematch in Australia. I don't know. We'll see. That remains to be seen. But there's at light heavyweight, he's got to fight presumably the winner of Ankalaev and Rakic. Ankalaev to me that's an interesting fight. Ankalaev has ways to win that fight. But that's kind of the last thing at the moment that I'm interested in him doing at light heavyweight. The prospect of Pereira at heavyweight that's a tasty one. I don't like his chances against Tom Aspinall, and if he does go up, you can't give him a guy who's like 2-1 in the UFC, right? At heavyweight, you can't give him some guy who's like making his debut or is just there. He'd have to fight somebody of relevance, and unless he's going to fight for the belt right away, which we got to see how all that plays out, because that is a Gordian knot that they're trying to untangle there a little bit. So the meme got floated around a little bit. If something happens to Stipe again, John's not going to fight Tom Aspinall on short notice, or vice versa. Like if I'm Stipe, I'm not, and I've signed to fight John, and John has some issue, whatever it happens to be. Okay, fight Tom Aspinall. No. They could wind up. It's not at all impossible for the UFC to just say, "Fine, screw it, strip John, promote Aspinall, and say, hey, Aspinall versus guess who? Alex Pereira for the undisputed heavyweight title." Highly unlikely, but it's not at all out of the question for circumstances to play out that way. If he's going to test the waters at heavyweight, I saw someone float Cyril Gane as an option, and I could see that. I could absolutely see that one. The other one that I thought might work, because the Gane one makes maybe the most sense, but I'm not really interested in him in Blades. I mean, I'm not disinterested in that fight, but Blades is a very strong wrestler. I wouldn't hate him and Pavlovich, but realistically, it's like, look, it's gone. Him and Volkov. So if he's gonna test the waters, Gane, Volkov, Pavlovich, who are like 2, 3, and 4. All definite thoughts worth considering in that respect. So, but fight of the night, easily one of the fights of the year. Great performances from both men for different reasons. Heck of a fight. Look this one up if you didn't see it. Co-main event, Juliana Pena defeats Raquel Pennington via split decision, 48-47s. Swing round seems to be the first round, which I gave to Pennington, but I guess you could argue Pena. Pena wins 2 and 3 cleanly. She's able to get a takedown in each round and then get enough top control. She went up with back control in the third. Um, Fourth round, Pennington gets back to avoiding overcommitting on her punches, but does drop Pena with a right hand. Fifth round, a little bit more of the same with the fourth, minus the dropping. So it kind of comes down to the first. I scored it for Pennington. Everyone in the media scored it for Pennington. Dana White scored it for Pennington. But it was close enough that I can't be out here and claim that Pennington got robbed. I just disagree with the decision. After the fight, Pena said, no, I don't want to fight Kayla Harrison. I want Amanda Nunes to come out of retirement because you really want to get your butt kicked again, I guess. She's really hanging her hat on that first fight when their second was comically not close. I don't care. There's nothing about it. Look, Kayla Harrison is as close as this division is getting to a breath of fresh air, but women's bantamweight is in dire straits. It is just, it's a terrible division right now. It's just bad. And this fight was not good. Seen a lot of people do that. It was fine. I'm going to push back on that a little bit. This is not the worst fight of the year, but this was not a good fight. Featured bout, bantamweight fight, Mario Bautista defeats Jose Aldo via split decision, 29-28. Comes down to the third round here as far as how we're trying to figure this one out. So first round, Bautista, who I picked Aldo last week. I questioned that more and more as we got closer to this fight, but stuck with it. Bautista's very good. Fights at a high pace, some pretty good stance switching. Ate a couple of leg kicks early from Aldo, but Aldo doesn't throw them a whole lot anymore. So didn't wind up playing much of a role, but in general, Bautista lands pretty decent punches in the first. Nothing huge, but lands enough. Doesn't get countered too often. Keeps a very high pace. And does some decent work in the clinch, which is where a lot of this fight is contested. Second round, Aldo much better about getting out of the clinch. Landed better counters, had his jab working more in the second round, had Bautista backing up a lot more. So 1 and 2, not really in dispute. Third round is where things get questionable. So for the third round, Bautista just does a lot of clinching. And doesn't make much of it. Aldo lands a few punches, but the bursts of offense from him are few and far between, and ultimately Bautista gets the decision. Now, live I scored it for Bautista. On reflection, I should have scored it for Aldo, because if all you have is control, you don't have anything. You have to be able to do something with what you have, and Bautista's not able to do much of anything with the constant clinching he has in the third round. So I think Aldo should have won this fight. Would have ruined my spreadsheet, but that actually would have helped my spreadsheet because I picked Aldo. But that really doesn't have anything to do with this. Like, my prediction was not why I thought Aldo should win. I think he should have won this fight on the scoring criteria. But we are kind of where we are with some of this, and it's not going to change until we do a radical overhaul of people judging and some of how the judging is done. I've told you guys before, I've come around to the notion that scoring the fight as a whole is better than round by round. To that effect, I'm going to talk about some of what Bautista did here and understand that this is applicable not only to him. So, couple of things. One, Jose Aldo's takedown defense is still phenomenal. Never got taken down. Dude, his last, 3 opponents are 0 and 20-something on takedown attempts against him, 0 and 30-something. Can't get that guy down to save your life. But, and this has been true of Aldo for a while, so part of what happened here is Aldo, 1, starting to look his age a little bit. 2, a lot of his game has kind of been figured out. He's still so good it's still hard to beat him. And you still have to kind of do this. But it's kind of been figured. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to take Jose Aldo down. It is much easier to get him to the fence and to burn clock. Now, that seems like I'm being dismissive of what Bautista did here, and this is a complaint I have generally. That's come more and more into focus for me over the last, I don't know, 3 months. I'm going to reference something I talked about several months ago, but Josh Barnett, talking with Ariel Helwani, I believe it was, said he would like to see some rule changes in MMA because part of his reasoning was he believed that the current MMA rule set, the unified rules at least, have been gamed. They've been figured out. And I don't think he's wrong. A lot of what Bautista did here is very similar to what Merab did to not only Aldo, but what Merab did to Sean O'Malley. It's not hard to get people to the fence. It's not always easy, but it's not necessarily all that hard, especially if you're willing to shoot. And Bautista is willing to shoot. If you're willing to shoot, you can get people into a position where you can force things to the fence. And from there, establishing a control position in the clinch against the cage, I don't mean to say it's the easiest thing in the world because that's an exaggeration, but it's not as hard, and it can be very difficult to get free. By way of example, talk about Merab again for a second. I'm not trying to bash the guy, but look at how well he fights a lot of the time. Look at what he did when he fought Petr Yan. He did a lot of that. When he fought O'Malley, a lot of that. When he fought Aldo, almost exclusively that. Merab is very good about pushing you into the fence, getting his hands together, and then grabbing his own gloves, which is perfectly legal, or establishing some kind of grip where your breaking it is going to take a lot of effort, and a lot of effort and a lot of time. And that whole time, he's doing other things. He's throwing knees, he's working for trips. Occasionally, you throw a few punches and then go back to your control position. That's one of the reasons I'm not trying to bash Merab here is I think he is generally more active with it. But this is what a lot of guys have figured out. That make contact, because getting to the clinch in MMA is fairly routine. It happens all the time. Get things to the fence so there's a barrier that you can lean on, and you can kill 2 minutes. It's not at all uncommon for, watch some of the guys who fight in this style. You get that position. You want another one? Holly Holm fight, as a general rule, kind of fights like this. You get that position, and then I have to do just enough. So if I look like I'm trying to hit a trip, if I look like I'm, pummeling for an underhook, if I've got to do a little bit of jockeying, couple of knees, maybe get just enough space to sneak in an elbow, the ref's not going to do anything. And you can kill half a round or more doing stuff that is, clinch fighting is not easy, but it is about as safe as you can get without being on top of someone on the ground. And getting someone down to the ground is more difficult. If you have a strong understanding of control in the clinch, and you know how to game how the referees are going to intervene, to the extent that they're going to intervene at all, Suddenly, what the other guy is dealing with is fighting from a deficit because, hey, look at all the control I have, even though that's supposed to be weighted almost not at all. But they're fighting at a deficit with a 2.5 minute round or less than that to try and make up the distance scoring wise that they've given up. That's kind of where things are going. People are figuring that out. And not here to dump on Bautista, who is a very good fighter and fought within the rules and fought within the criteria of the current system to the extent that you can argue it was misapplied. Another discussion. Um, yeah, that's just kind of where it is. And Bautista got booed out of the building, um, which I understand. Like the third round, some of this, there's a degree to which a bit of this is on Aldo, and I'll talk about that in a second. But there were times in the third round when the referee would separate them fairly, not like not an unfair, very quick separation, but referee like, okay, we're done, separate. Start, get people to take a couple of steps off the fence, or they got to take a couple of steps back, fight, and Bautista instantly double leg shot back into the clinch against the fence, just immediately. So there's stuff that he did here that not gonna win him any fans, not gonna win him any favors, and to a decent chunk of people, he should not have won the third round, and therefore should not have won the fight. I still think Bautista has a very, very bright future. He's very talented, and beating Jose Aldo is very difficult. Let's talk about the part Jose Aldo played in this. Jose Aldo's takedown defense is the stuff of legend. What he's not as good at is getting off of the fence. At different points in his career, he was more diligent about it, but he just doesn't have the necessary urgency with how a lot of people fight now to not be kind of held there. And that is a bit of a problem for him. But that's going to be a problem for a lot of people. That's just, especially at the higher end. This is not a fan-friendly strategy at all, but it is a winning strategy. And you should not discount that. Middleweight, Roman Dolidze and Kevin Holland. We had a corner stoppage for a rib injury between rounds 1 and 2. Holland had an okay first couple of minutes, then gets taken down by Dolidze. Dolidze on top. Able to do some decent ground and pound, but the turning point is Holland kind of swivels his hips for an armbar, loses it, tries to scramble around to start regaining his feet from Turtle, but as he's going around, his rib gets injured. Dolidze moves into mount. That's where the round winds up ending. He lands some decent ground and pound. Props to Kevin Holland's corner, by the way, who Holland gets back up, talks to him, and says, yeah, it's my rib. And the corner immediately says, can you fight? If you can't, I'm going to stop it. Holland, I don't want to, but man, I don't know exactly what injury might have happened there, but you can kind of see it in the slow motion replay they showed. There is something that moves away it's not supposed to move. So I don't know if it was just stretching out the intercostal tissue, or if where the bone connects to the cartilage may have gotten partially separated, or if something actually broke. But rib injuries are incredibly painful. Holland's in there going, I don't want out, but dang it. So they take the full minute between rounds. And looking at Kevin Holland at the end of that period, his coach looks over at the ref, Jason Herzog, I believe, and goes, no, we're done. Good job by the coach. Others might have handled that much worse. So wanted to give an acknowledgement that the corner made the right call there. So that was a good one. Decent enough win for Dolidze. This was supposed to be Holland and Chris Curtis, which would have been a more interesting fight, I think. But Maybe they'll try to remake it. I don't know that Holland at middleweight has like the biggest future. He's of the appropriate height for the weight class, but his frame is just, despite the length, you get height and length, he's just not a very big guy. You know, he's not very thick and densely muscled. If he maybe he can change some of his body composition to reflect that if he wants to make a serious push, but he would. That's the kind of thing he would need to do if he's going to do that. And kicking off the main card, Kayla Harrison wins a unanimous decision over Ketlin Vieira, 230-27 and a 29-28. Good enough win for Harrison. Not great. Second round was the one that could have gone to Vieira. Part of this was Vieira getting almost criminally overlooked. But the other part of this is Harrison, I think she loses a fair bit of her athletic ability in this cut to 135. Watch her even fighting at like 145, 155. It's not quite the same. See nothing of her judo career. She was incredibly dynamic. So I think a little bit of that gets lost. Her distance closing in MMA leaves a little bit to be desired. She does a lot of it with either just kind of getting to a clinch or doing kind of a bad rendition of the Frankie Edgar, like reach with the backhand, knee tap with the lead hand. Because Frankie did that all the time, but part of the reason it worked for Frankie Edgar was a little bit more, not only his quickness, but constant mobility and understanding the distance at which he could do that effectively, and Kayla doesn't quite have that. But once Kayla gets... Fighting Kayla Harrison on the ground is a nightmare. I mean, the first round, when she does get to the ground, she winds up in mount like it's nothing. Kellen Vieira is not a nothing on the ground, and Harrison just passed her guard like butter. Third round has some back control time, but spends a good chunk of it in full guard rather, excuse me, and just landing punches and elbows. Kayla's ground and pound is nothing to trifle with. It's very solid. Her striking leaves a bit to be desired right now. Her distance management and closing is really the problem. Because people are understandably afraid to clinch with her. Because clinching with the best judoka the United States of America has ever produced, and a two-time Olympic gold medalist, is something you do at your own peril. But her actual wrestling, little bit. That's kind of what she did get Vieira down with in the third when she finally got her there, was got into a clinch, but instead of just kind of settling for a 50-50 position, was able to get her hands together finally, sort of around the hips, not quite under the butt, but around the hips enough to lift and get Vieira down. I still think she's a giant problem for anyone in this weight class. I would favor her to beat Juliana Pena, but you can see where there's things she's still working on. And that was your main card. It was, apart from the main event, relatively forgettable. So once again, Alex Pereira saving the day. Prelims, Joaquin Buckley knocks out Stephen Thompson, 217 of the third. Gave Buckley, I think, the first. Thompson had the second, and Thompson was winning the third, but Thompson's ring awareness has started to diminish. It's getting easier and easier for people to back him into the fence, which is where the finish came from. Buckley got him going backwards, but before Thompson could circle, wound up towards the fence, and Buckley with a leaping right hook just crushed him. Never good seeing Stephen Thompson knocked out, but he fought pretty darn well. He was intercepting a lot of Buckley's entries, good about wall walking. There's a lot about Stephen Thompson's game that's still very good, but I hope he doesn't stick around too long. He's already 40. I don't want to see him get to the point where he's at the sad phase of his career. I really don't. Buckley, after the fight, called out Kamaru Usman, which he's been kind of banging the drum for a little bit. Didn't make as much sense after his last fight. Makes a bit more sense now because more time has passed and Usman still hasn't done anything. So, oh, he called out Connor at one point, didn't he? Yeah, he did. That was the one he did last time. Was calling out Connor, which was comical. Usman makes that's achievable and a reasonable call out. So, I'm not opposed to that fight if they can make it. Yasmin Lucindo defeated Marina Rodriguez via split decision, 29-28. I think I scored this for Rodriguez, but 29-28 for Lucindo is hardly terrible. Big thing here for me was Rodriguez on the ground. Um, really needs work on her get-ups. Really. On the feet, she was going fairly well with Lucindo. But she also does a lot of clinching because she wants to do a lot of knees and elbows from the tie, from the some variation of the collar tie. That was a bad decision against Lucinda, who anytime she tried that would just collapse the clinch into more of a wrestling clinch and then get her down. Alexander Hernandez defeated Austin Hubbard via split decision. There was a 30-27 for Hubbard. Okay. And then two 29-28s for Hernandez. Nothing really special here. I think the big thing that coalesced for me about Hubbard in this fight, I think lightweight's probably where he's better suited physically, but his game is not coherent. And certainly, it's not cohesive is maybe a better way to say that. He doesn't build, right? I think even Dean Thomas called him out on this. Like, there's a few different things that are kind of working, but nothing is building. Nothing really harmonizes together, and that's just a bad place to be. No issues with Hernandez winning the fight. The fight wasn't anything special. In your bizarre officiating performance of the evening, Cesar Almeida defeats Ihor Potieria via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards, all of which is fine. But the referee in this was almost comically inept. So Almeida wins the first round, just better striker. Potieria gasses as the fight goes on. But in the second round, I think it was the second, Almeida pokes him in the eye 3 times. And one of them the ref missed, which you never like to see, but looking at how it happened on the slow-mo replay, you can see, okay, there was some finger contact in the eye. In real time, that was a lot harder to discern. I'll give him a little bit of a break on that first one. The second one, not so much. And then Almeida also, that same round, punched Potieria in the groin. Right hand, he's aiming kind of towards the body, but he catches the upper part of the cup. If there's 3 fouls in one round committed by one guy, just take a point. I beg of you. Part of the reason Almeida was doing that was they were happening after Potieria would miss a punch that Almeida's trying to frame on the face and push away. And you do this with big gloves all the time. Even Dean Thomas brought up, kickboxers do this a lot. MMA fighters do this a lot because most of the time they train with big gloves. Certainly enclosed fingers. And you can frame and you can push easier because you're not going to get a digit up into the eye. You can still thumb the eye if you're a real dirty son of a gun, but it's harder. So, but you just build that habit of, okay, here's how I frame, here's what I do, and it's different with the MMA gloves. So that's kind of where that was coming from, but you're the ref. You have to be the one to go, okay, stop it. Then there were some very quick clinch breaks in the third round that commentary got really pissy about. I was not, actually. The first one, Potieria gets a clinch. They kind of just stagger into the fence because he's gassed. And they both just stop. They're just hanging out there. There's not even a crappy knee thrown to the thigh. They're just there, doing nothing. And the ref quickly breaks them up. And commentary gets pissy, and Joe Rogan's all does his, I never want to see the referee intervene at all. Joe, it's a spectator sport. I don't mind clinch fighting. I really don't, but do something with it. If you're not doing something with it, if you're not... This is one of the criteria, so a bit of extracurricular look at this if you want. In the aftermath of some of the controversy thrown at Herb Dean for his officiating during O'Malley and Marab, Luke Thomas did a video where he broke down the instances where Herb Dean attempted to instigate action and whether or not it was warranted. And go watch his video. There's at least one of those that I can't remember which one. But there's one that I didn't necessarily agree with his assessment on. But in general, he's making a point. Like, the rules state that it's not just work to improve, there is working to finish. If I'm holding you and I'm kneeing you in the thigh and you can't get away, but all I'm doing is kneeing you in the thigh, I'm not working to finish a fight. I don't knee you that. I can't knee that hard. Like, there is a component of this that is working towards the conclusion of the fight. And that was utterly bereft in any of the clinches in this one. The ref could have avoided some of the controversy if he more loudly tells them to work, waits 5 more seconds, then breaks them up. Because a quicker trigger the next few times becomes more understandable if they really don't do anything in the first one. The referee just kind of tried to shortcut the process, which, don't get me wrong, I kind of appreciate, and that's one of the reasons I'm not mad about him over that first one. I think the second one was a little bit quick, but they just weren't doing anything in the clinch, so yeah, break it up. There was some complaint, like, I think Corbin's like, yeah, it's like he's reffing a boxing match. Well, no, he wasn't that quick on it, but I've seen boxers do better clinch work than these two guys were doing, too. So, not a fan of the ref's officiating job overall. I think the breaks in the third round were overstated. The mishandling of the fouls to me was the much, much bigger issue. Not a great fight. Almeida won. Easy call. Pereira still sucks. On the early prelims, Ryan Spann with a guillotine choke over Ovince St. Preux. Cracked him with a punch, got him a little bit out of sorts. St. Preux ties up. Ryan Spann, high elbow guillotine, rolls to mount with it, gets the tap. Solid stuff. Tisha Pennington defeated Carla Esparza via unanimous decision, 229-28 in the 30-27. The crowd was pissy about this one. Here's my thing about this. Esparza had a good closing, 5 seconds of the third. The 30-27 for Pennington, I don't agree with. I think the first round Esparza should have won. Second to Pennington, no problems. Third is where things get dicey, and just honestly, Esparza had a shining moment near the end. If she'd had 20 more seconds of that, she probably wins the round and wins the fight. She didn't. I'm not up in arms over it. Emotionally, because this was Esparza's last fight, and with the last image of the last round was of Esparza dropping elbows, but it wasn't enough to overcome the previous parts of the round that she lost, so I can see it. And then kicking everything off, Court McGee got a neck crank win over Tim Means, 319 of the first. McGee looking pretty good here. Apparently he'd been dealing with neck issues that he's only recently really gotten kind of fixed up. Nice to see him get a win here, native Utah guy. And this was a neck crank, actually. This was not a rear naked choke. I've yelled about this a little bit. I've talked about this in the past. You can do the rear naked choke across the jaw. It being across the jaw instead of under the chin is not the determinant factor about whether or not it's a choke or a crank. This was a crank because what was causing the problem and what got the tap was not the constriction of the blood vessels. It was the torque on the neck and the angle that McGee hit with it. He didn't even have, look at that again. half of Tim Means' neck is fairly safe, but if we're talking about like the carotid arteries, but the crank and the angle is enough to get him to. In fact, he like mentioned that his neck was messed up by this, so this was more of a neck crank. Instead of compressing back, it was turning the angle and applying pressure to the neck, not constricting the blood. So for what it's worth, I'm not mad about this one being a neck crank. That's a fair call. So good win for Court McGee. And yeah, that was the card. So let's all be grateful for Alex Pereira. All I'm saying. Fight of the night, already mentioned, was Pereira and Rountree walking away. Performances went to Ryan Spann and Joaquin Buckley. I might have gone McGee over Spann, but flip a coin there. Dude, just nobody cared about that first fight. Like the crowd, there was a decent enough crowd for it, but like the UFC socials didn't even post clips of the finish. Just like nobody expected it. So not mad about Spann doing it, but between the other three finishes, Buckley was kind of a shoo-in. Between the other two, flip a coin. Kind of where we landed. So that is that. Full report is in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. Y'all know that. Yeah, so anyone who's read or is going to read, I appreciate the heck out of you. All right, let's move on then, shall we? Because we have... I did not expect that to take that long. UFC on ESPN Plus 102. We're back in the warehouse, so that's always a good time, right? Who doesn't love warehouse fights? We do have a good main event, though. My antipathy for the Apex aside. We've got a good main event. Brandon Royval and Tetsuto Taira, really good flyweight fight. Yeah, I'm gonna need this other website as well. And I need you. That's on that. That needs to be updated. Okay, here we are. Okay, sorry about that. So, as I said, main event, Brandon Royval, Tetsuto Taira. Really like this fight. Royval, former title challenger. Failed to beat Alexandre Pantoja. Got a split decision win over Brandon Moreno his last time. That was a good fight. I don't remember how I scored it, but I don't remember being upset that he won. I mean, his only losses in the UFC are to Moreno, which he's now avenged, and then Pantoja twice. So he's a very good flyweight. And then we've got Taira, undefeated, 16-0, only 24 years old. Tore up Alex Perez's knee in their last fight. 6-0 in the UFC. Might be a bit too much too soon for Taira. Again, only 25, whereas Royval 32. I'm just very much looking forward to this fight. Two guys who are scramble heavy, two very good grapplers, two guys who will get after the fight. The odds are with Taira, and I think he has the better upside. I'll say it again, though. This could be the case of young, talented, rising fighter steps to just kind of the wrong guy at the wrong time. I'm going to go with Taira, but let me asterisk that. I want to watch some more tape on those two. At the moment, I have no problem going with Taira, but him as a 2-1 favorite, he's at least minus 200 most places. I expect that line to close. Royval's better than a plus 180 dog. But that's a really good fight. Very much looking forward to it. Not sure I can say that about anything else on this card, but that fight I'm looking forward to. Co-main event, Brad Tavares and Jun Young Park. I don't hate this fight, but it being the co-main event is a little telling. Tavares 1-3 in his last 4 losses. In fairness, those losses are to Dricus du Plessis, Bruno Silva, and Gregory Rodriguez. Now, he did have a win over Chris Weidman in there as well. So, lost to current champion Bruno Silva and RoboCop. Jun Young Park, I have a soft spot for. Dropped a split decision to Andre Muniz his last time out. That was December of last year. He fought well in that fight, actually. Had, what, a 4-fight winning streak going before that? I mean, not guys that you think should be in the UFC. Even Eric Anders, Joseph Holmes, Dennis Talul, and Albert Duraev. The odds are actually with Park, which I find a little surprising. I don't know that Tavares is that over the hill. He's only 36. I mean, he's 36 with 29 fights and has been in the UFC since 2010, though. 14 years in the UFC, that's a lot of mileage. That is a lot of mileage. I mean, Park's similar. He's only 33, 23 fights. Tavares has fought and beat better opposition. The question at hand is really how shop-worn do you think Tavares is? Because Park has not been in as many battles as Tavares has. I told you guys before I got a soft spot for Park. I'll go with him because I like the Iron Turtle. But plus money on Tavares here. If you're looking for value, just saying. Let's see, lightweights next. We have Grant Dawson and Rafa Garcia. Dawson, 30. His only loss in the UFC is to Bobby Green. Beat Joe Selecki his last time out. Garcia, I don't think Garcia is a bad fighter. In fact, thankfully he beat Clay Guida in April of last. He's been out for over a year. Huh. Wonder why. Had a rough start to his UFC run, losing to Nasrat Haqparast and Chris Grutzmacher. Beat Natan Levy, beat Jesse Ronson, lost to Dakar Close, beat Mahashate, beat Clay Guida. Yeah, no problem going with Dawson here. This is the kind of fight Dawson usually wins. Strawweight next. Julia Polastri and Corey McKenna. Sorry, is that Julia or Yulia? Where are you from, madam? Brazil, so that is Julia. Polastri is 12-4. Lost her UFC debut to Josephine Knudsen. That's not encouraging. McKenna 8-3. 3-2 in the UFC. Losses to Elise Reed and Jacqueline Yamarim. Has wins over, Kay Hansen, Miranda Granger, and Cheyenne Vlismus. Why is this on the main card? I know it's the warehouse, but why is this on the main card? Odds are actually with Polastri. I'll trust the odds makers to know something I don't in this kind of a situation. All right, next we have Daniel Rodriguez and Alex Morono. I don't hate this fight, actually. Rodriguez, 3-fight losing streak. If we're going to, again, do the fairness thing, Neil Magny, Ian Gary, and then a middleweight fight with Kelvin Gastelum. Which was not supposed to be middleweight. Gastelum just sucks at making weight. There's a decent amount about Rodriguez's game that I like. And Morono people have started to figure him out a little bit. 3-3 in his last 6, trading wins and losses. Losses to Ponzinibbio, Buckley, and Nico Price. Morono's issues of fading are fairly well established. The question is, can Rodriguez capitalize on that? Odds think he can. I tend to agree. Morono's good, and I'm not going to be shocked one iota if he wins this, but he's just. There's enough tape on him that people have started figuring him out. And especially the way he's really started kind of slowing by the time he gets to the third round. And kicking off the main card, we have Abdul Razak Al Hassan and Josh Fremd. So, Al Hassan has been kind of hit and miss at middleweight. In that weight class, he is 2-3 with a no contest. Yeah, the last one, he did kind of hit Brundage in the back of the head, but Brundage also starting to get a reputation as. I said at the time, like, just don't foul the guy, you won't have that problem, but. Fremd, on the other hand, a little bit of just kind of a smothering wrestler. 11-6. Only 2-4 in the UFC. Lost his last two to Roman Kopylov and Andrei Petroski. That Petroski loss in particular was pretty damning. I just don't know how good Fremd is. But then again, I don't know what's up with Al Hassan either. This is a tough one as far as predictions go. Let me go with Al Hassan. I am not confident whatsoever in that one, though. On the prelims, we have Chidi Njokuani and Jared Gooden. Chidi just broke a 3-fight losing streak with a split decision over Reese McKee. Rough stretch for him. Got stopped by Gregory Rodriguez after opening up that gnarly cut on Rodriguez. Split decision to Albert Duraev, then stopped by Mikhail Luksezhuk. Gooden. Yeah, the night train, right? Yeah. Beat Wellington Turman most recently. Lost to Carlston Harris before that. Gooden's still trying to make welterweight. That is not a very good weight class for him. Very similar records between these two. 23-10 on Njokuani, 23-9 for Gooden. Gooden's a little bit chinny. And Njokuani's quick. Yeah, let me go with Njokuani. But Njokuani's not that far removed from just a really bad stretch. Flyweight, CJ Vergara and Ramazan Temirov. Vergara, been with the UFC for a little bit. 3-3? Yeah, had some weight issues. Dude, he's missed weight so much. Missed weight in his UFC debut. Missed weight when he fought Tatsuro Taira. His opponent missed weight at 291. Then he missed weight when he fought Asu Almabayev. Dude, this has to be his last shot at flyweight. If he misses again, I mean, one, I get to call him fat forever, but two, you got to force him to move up. Like, that's ridiculous. But Temirov, 17-2, Uzbek. 9-fight winning streak. This is his UFC debut. He beaten anyone whose name I recognize. I doubt it. He's done the, he fought in Ryzen a couple of times. This year, actually, he's fought a couple of times in Ryzen. Beat Yuta Hamamoto and then Takaki Soya. I saw one of those. I can't remember which one. Might have been the Soya one that I saw. Um, yeah, I don't have much of a problem. I think the odds are going to be with Temerov, and so am I, for the record. And yeah, Temerov. Vergara just not really been all that impressive in the UFC thus far. Featherweights, Jonathan Pierce and Pat Sabatini. We're going to get a lot of wrestling here. I don't even mean that as an insult, but a lot of wrestling. Pierce more control, Sabatini more submission focused. Sabatini lost to Diego Lopez November of last year. He's been out for a minute or two. Lost in the UFC to Damon Jackson and the aforementioned Diego Lopez. Other than that, beat Jamal Emmers, Tucker Lutz, TJ Laramie, Lucas Almeida. Pierce, isn't he coming off of that loss to Brito? Oh, and coming off a loss to David Onama. Onama missed weight pretty badly, actually, jeez. But yeah, he was wrestling Brito and was like, well, get up and do something about it. So Brito wall walked and then ninja choked him. It was kind of funny. His featherweight run's been pretty good, apart from the Brito and Onama fights. And again, Onama missed by 3.5 pounds, so give him a little bit of a mulligan. The layoff on Sabatini's nothing to sneeze at either. It's enough for me to lean Pierce. Not by a whole lot, but it's enough. Welterweights, Temba Garimbo and Nico Price. This will be funny. Because Nico Price is kind of funny to begin with when he fights. But Garimbo, 3-fight winning streak. Lost his UFC debut in 3-0 cents. Wins over Takashi Sato, Pete Rodriguez, and then Ramiz Brahimaj. Then Price, who is just Florida man, and we love him for it. Coming off that much-needed win over Alex Morono, lost to Robbie Lawler before that in very short order. Feels like they're trying to build Garimbo a little bit, and Price is not a gimme by any stretch of the imagination, but the tea leaf reading is... Tea leaf reading goes with Garimbo there, so we will go with him as well and live with the consequences. Heavyweight, Chris Barnett and Junior Taffa. This will be either very funny or very sad. Barnett coming off of that win over Jake Collier where he hit the wheel kick, but he also missed weight. Second guy ever to miss weight at heavyweight. Oh, no, sorry, it was Volante that he hit with the wheel kick. Collier, that was a fight. Junior Taffa, not quite as good as his brother Justin. Junior got heel hooked by Walter Walker his last time out. Then complained because I didn't tap. No, you just yelled in pain. That's a submission. Get over it. Know the rules. I can't quite say this is win or go home for Taffa, but he's 1-3 in the UFC. When your only win is over Parker Porter, that's saying something. Odds are pretty heavily with Taffa. That's a little surprising. He's going to be lighter. He's got good power. You know what? No, I'm going with Barnett just for the lulz. And that one just amuses me, so I'll go with Beast Boy. Bantamweights, Daniel Argueta. It's for Argueta. I can't remember. And Cody Haddon. Argueta. tough at taking that on short notice, too. That was supposed to be Barnett and Waldo Cortez Acosta, so it makes me feel a little better. Yeah, Argueda 9-2. 1-2 in the UFC with 2 no contests. Somewhat weirdly. Can't remember why that one with Miles Johns got changed. The Ronnie Lawrence one was just a weird stoppage. Coming off a loss to John Matsumoto. So he's kind of needs a win, whereas Haddon 7-1. 5-fight winning streak. I believe this is his UFC debut. Yeah, he's coming off a Contender Series win. So they're kind of trying to get his feet under him a little bit. How old is Argueda? 31. To Haddon, who has a baby face. He's only 26. I think the UFC is looking for Haddon to get this win. I don't know that he will, though. Argueda's tough. Very dogged wrestler. I don't want to buck the odds too many times. I'll go with Haddon, but I don't know. Not sold on that one. And kicking everything off, we have at flyweight Clayton Carpenter and Lucas Hosha. So Carpenter 7-0. Got to be a Contender Series dude then, right? Yeah, he is. And no, made his UFC debut earlier this year and beat Juan Camilo Ronderos. His Contender Series win was over Edgar Chairez. That is nothing to sneeze at. Rocha 17-1. Excuse me, Hosha. 6-fight winning streak. Coming in off the Contender Series win. That's that might be Hosha, if we're being honest. Odds are with Carpenter. The inexperience is kind of what's tickling at me here. A quick look at Hosha a little bit more. 5'3", 64 inches of reach, only 24 years old. Good grief. I am ancient. Carpenter, 5'6", 66 inches of reach. Fights out of the lab. Wait, who does... If Hoach is a fighting nerd, I'm going to go with him. No. All right, I'll go with Carpenter, but that's kind of trusting the odds makers a little bit more than I normally like to. Anyway, that's the card. So that is UFC on ESPN Plus 102 next Saturday. MMA Zone of 411mania.com. You'll know where to find me. I'll be covering that. Alrighty. News. Let's get through this quick. So, first thing that I saw mentioned that I want to talk about. In the wake of his win last week, Renato Moicano received no bonus post-fight, and he didn't actually move up in the rankings. So Dana White mentioned, yeah, we're going to look at instituting an AI to help with rankings, and what a silly decision that is. If you're to the point where you're just going to like sanction some kind of machine learning program to do this, just do it yourselves. I mean, what are we doing here? I'm not even one of those guys who's like opposed to the use of generative technology, both in language model and even generative images. Provided, I think there's ways to use them ethically, and I think people are dragging their heels about this because they're afraid of new technology. Now, anyone being too lazy with it, okay, please don't be lazy. But there's ways to use it, and to use it effectively, to make sure the appropriate people are compensated. I'm not one of these people who's just like, AI bad. Even though most of these aren't even AI, again, they're generative tools, not actual artificial intelligence, but that's a whole other ballgame, a linguistic ballgame I don't necessarily think I want to step into. So, yeah, there's that. Then Dana White lying about, got asked, Francis Ngannou got brought up because Ngannou made a boatload of money boxing. He's like, yeah, don't believe the boxing people when they say how much money Francis made. He could have made more here, which is a load of crap. So once again, Dana White, full of crap. Um, I didn't have a lot of news, so let me check the old X machine, see if anything crazy is broken. If not, we will do plugs and get out of here. Okay, nope, nothing new there in the MMA space. Well, Alex Pereira saying he only trained for 3 weeks and was dealing with some kind of a illness and rib issues, and just kind of par for the course for that man, I guess, at this point. Anyway, plugs. Monday, statistically speaking, when you'll be listening to this, Damn You Hollywood will be tackling one of the larger bombs of the year, Joker, Folie à Dieu. Um, I am not looking forward to this. Let's be honest with you guys. I'm sure the podcast will be fine. Me, Mark, Alexis, we'll talk about stuff, but I am gonna. It's weird to say I'm gonna be alone. Kind of dislike. Mark didn't like it that much either, but I don't know. I've kind of reached the point where I don't mind reviewing stuff that I don't like if I think it's interesting, but I don't know. I'm just not looking forward to this one. So tune in though, see what happens. That'll be a good time. Do I have anything else this week? I don't think so. Usual spate of coverage: WWE SmackDown on Friday, UFC event on Saturday. We'll be back here next week to review UFC on ESPN Plus 102, and we'll preview Hernandez and Pereira. That's October 19th. So yes, we will preview UFC on ESPN Plus 103, still in the warehouse. I like the main event. Anthony Hernandez and Michelle Pereira. No real complaints there from me. That is a good fight. I don't hate Rob Font and Kyler Phillips. And I don't dislike Mateusz Nicolau and Asu Almabayev. The rest of this card kind of sucks. But that's where we are at the moment. So full preview for that next week. Hope you'll be back. Until then, once again, I thank you all very much for listening. I appreciate the heck out of you. So thank you for indulging me. Thank you for making me part of your fandom. Thank you for spending some of your time on my product here. So seriously, thank you guys. Stay safe out there. World's getting crazier. And be well, be safe, and behave.